Every society needs someone to uphold its laws and standards, to prevent crime and to pursue wrongdoers. Over time, there have been various ways of doing these things. The hue and cry, collective responsibility, outlawing, sheriffs, even using the army. But since the 1830s, the primary way has been via police force. While there are law enforcement older than London's Metropolitan Police, they are mostly paramilitary. The French gendarmes, for example, are a part of the French armed forces, but they carry out both policing and security tasks. The police, as we understand it, comes from the English experience. The success of this experiment, because it was an experiment, is shown by the fact that for 150 years, the English policeman, the bobby, was not simply a symbol of law enforcement, but a symbol of law, civility, and of civilization itself. He was as much a symbol of the British Empire as the British Army or the Royal Navy. In Canada, one of the great national symbols is the Mountie, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In the United States, there are a number of world-famous law enforcement and police agencies. Sometimes they're famous for the wrong reasons. Everywhere in the world, there are such forces, but none are as famous as those already mentioned. How did such an experiment work? Conservatives were not in favour of such forces. They believed that it would be a continuation of the French gendarme, an army without cavalry or artillery, but an army just the same. But Sir Robert Peel had a different idea, and he was fortunate in deciding to appoint 2 commissioners to his Metropolitan Police, a soldier by the name of Colonel Sir Charles Rowan, and a lawyer, or as Sir Robert called him, a sensible lawyer, Sir Richard Mayne. Within weeks of the formation of the force, a book was issued to all ranks. It was known as the General Instruction. Here is the second paragraph. It should be understood at the outset that the principal object to be obtained is the prevention of crime. To this great end, every effort of the police is to be directed. The security of person and property, the preservation of the public tranquillity, and all the objects of a police establishment will thus be better effected than by the detection and punishment of the offender after he has succeeded in committing the crime. This should constantly be kept in mind by every member of the police force as a guide for his own conduct. Officers and police constables should endeavour to distinguish themselves by such vigilance and activity as may render it extremely difficult for anyone to commit a crime within that portion of the town under their charge. The aim was to prevent crime rather than to solve crime or to imprison people, and in fact, over the first decade of the Metropolitan Police, crime dropped greatly. But it was not simply the presence of police that made crime drop. There were other principles that were applied that also assisted. They are known by historians as the Peelian principles. 1. To prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to their repression by military force and severity of legal punishment. 2. To recognise always that the power of the police to fulfil their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions and behaviour, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. 3. To recognise always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the police means also the securing of the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing observance of laws. 4. To recognise always that the extent to which the cooperation of the public can be secured diminishes proportionately the necessity of the use of physical force and compulsion for achieving police objectives. 5. To seek and preserve public favour, not by pandering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolute impartial service to law, in complete independence of policy and without regard to the justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws, by ready offering of individual service and friendship to all members of the public without regard to their wealth or social standing, by ready exercise of courtesy and friendly good humour, and by ready offering of individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. 6. To use physical force only when the exercise of persuasion, advice and warning is found to be insufficient to obtain public cooperation to an extent necessary to secure observance of law or to restore order, and to use the minimum degree of physical force which is necessary on any particular occasion for achieving a police objective. 7. to maintain at all times a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and that the public are the police being only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interest of community welfare and existence. 8. To recognise always the need for strict adherence to police executive functions and to refrain from even seeming to usurp the power of the judiciary of avenging individuals or the state and of authoritatively judging guilt and punishing the guilty. 9. To recognise always that the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. Since the 1960s, policing has changed, and to be honest, not for the better. Society changed, the politicians changed, and so did the courts. In time, so did the police. The first major change was the creation of SWAT, or Special Weapons and Tactics Units. This was a major departure from Peelian principles, as it was turning away from minimum force to a more paramilitary force. In hindsight, maybe these quasi-military tasks should have been handled by the military. But it was only the start of a process whereby the police would become paramilitary over time. The next thing to force a change was civil rights. Here I mean civil rights in its broadest context, minorities, women, in fact anyone who was excluded from policing for any reason. Before the 1970s, nearly every police force had a height limit. In most places it was 6 foot tall. Starting from the time that began to change, height limits plummeted. Women were being recruited as well as increasing minorities. In short, standards were being changed and rarely were they being improved upon. Policing is an active task. It cannot be put on hold and done tomorrow, and it can be very hard to hide its failures. That has stopped the worst excesses because they affect things very quickly, something that the military, which has long periods where it is not active, will be unable to do. But this lowering of standards have meant police had to find new ways of doing the job. The old weapons of persuasion, baton and handgun no longer did the job with police of smaller stature. Tasers, capsicum spray, shotgun and long-arm weapons now became more favoured, as did the use of SWAT teams. These SWAT teams gained 2 big boosts in the 1980s with the increased violence of the drug trade, and the second when the Cold War ended. Now military equipment that was no longer needed could be given to police to fight the drug gangs. But just as people became addicted to drugs, so the police became addicted to this new military hardware, to the idea that it made them safer and helped put the bad guys down. This attitude was helped in the 1990s by a number of instances where the police were outgunned, such as the North Hollywood shootout. Added to this was the breakdown of the family. Divorce and single parenthood seemed to make the police seek the role of authority figure over everyone. The age of the friendly policeman came to an end, and the age of the authority figure arrived. The police took a no-nonsense approach with everybody. The police came to see us all as the enemy. Step by step, the police left the Peelian principles behind. I live 15 minutes from my local police station, but I do not know any of the police there, and they do not know me. We are strangers with little in common. There's no shared community. The police might live here or 100 miles away. They patrol in cars, although 3 years ago I did see a bike patrol, and I even saw a horse patrol. They more resemble cavalry than police, and that is how people now think of them. If you're in trouble, you dial the cavalry to come to your rescue. The police were once, only a few decades ago, respected as the thin blue line, holding back the barbarians. But as the police became increasingly paramilitary, with various weapons on their body armour, and now cameras, I cannot help feeling that I'm dealing with an enemy. Where the police are loyal to the law, and the law is used against us, how can the police be on our side? Sadly, like so many of our public institutions, the police are also failing us. If they wish to alienate us with their RoboCop armour and face masks, how can we respect them? And once conservatives and traditionalists have lost respect for the police, where does that leave either of us?